Well, today's question is, who do you consider more at fault for Caesar's civil war, Caesar or Cato? In my first one, I've talked about the first video right at the start of this series, support for a historian not to judge, not to make moral decisions, and to leave that open to your readers, your listeners. But obviously there is a case where you're looking at a struggle that develops in January 49 BC when Caesar leads 13th Legion across the Rubicon. You precipitate a civil war that will be fought in Italy, in Spain, in southern Gaul, in North Africa, in Greece, in Macedonia, in Asia, in Egypt, spread all the way around the Mediterranean. Draw upon lots of people, get recruited into the army to fight for causes they don't really know much about. An awful lot of resources are poured into those armies. Cities are devastated, destroyed in the course of it. So the human loss, the cost of this war is immense. And obviously politically it ends up with Caesar as dictator. So the one-man rule that people like Cato and other Romans have always thought was anathema in their constitution actually happens, only for Caesar to be murdered and for very quickly more civil wars to follow, and you eventually lead to the rise of Caesar Augustus and the imperial system, the rule of emperors. It is a major moment, and it is a war that is fought about personal prestige and status more than issues and ideology. Cato is perhaps more of an ideological opponent of Caesar than many others, but he just hates Caesar as well. And his basis, his root motivation is that he does not want Caesar to come back and be able to stand for election for a second consulship, granting him immunity from prosecution all of that time, and then potentially after the consulship, does he want another province, more campaigns, more glory, more money, increasing his status all the more. Caesar declares, looking at the dead Pompeians after Pharsalus, that they wanted this, but for my army they would have passed judgment on me. And people have been boasting and talking about how they'll put Caesar on trial with armed guards around the court and all this sort of thing. They want to put him on trial. They're not going to give him a fair trial. They've determined that he's guilty anyway, and they want to end his political career. And in essence, the civil war of 49 comes down to this. Cato and those people who ally with him want to end Caesar's career. Caesar is not willing to have his career ended after all the glory, the distinction that he's won in Gaul, and in offices that, as far as he's concerned, have been freely voted to him by the Roman people. He's the popular choice. The Senate has declared more public thanksgivings for his victories than they have for any other commander in the past, including Pompey. So they've been telling him, well done and aren't you marvellous, for years. They've given him this job. He's performed it very well. He's been writing accounts to tell everybody he's been performing it really, really well. And now they want to pull the rug out from under his feet and turn him from being a hero of the Republic, an honoured servant of the Republic, into an outlaw and an exile. But it is that personal element. This is about personal status. People want to deny Caesar this status, and Caesar isn't willing to let that happen. And for that reason, they escalate this conflict, this disagreement, until they plunge the entire Mediterranean world, the Roman Republic, its provinces, its allies, into a very costly civil war that drastically changes the political system. But who's to blame in this situation? It is harder to say. I think you come back again and again to the thought that really until the last minute neither side thought that the other would be willing to fight. They thought the other one would back down. Personally, if you look back at Caesar's first consulship in 59 BC, yes, there'd been disorder, but on the whole, the laws that he passes are considered to be generally rather good ones. The land reform, the distribution of land is something that's been a problem for a long time. Approving Pompey's settlement of the East, again, a good thing. It was sensible. The assistance to Crassus and the Publicani, probably more of a political decision where we need these people's support and we need their finances rather than this is the best thing to happen for Rome and the Republic. Other legislation is fairly sensible. Caesar presents himself throughout his commentaries as having behaved in Gaul as the best sort of servant of the Roman Republic and its interests, and done that with great panache and ability and success, but done it in the right way, for the right reasons, for the good of Rome. It is a little hard to see what would have been so terrible about allowing him this second consulship. But you have this problem again and again with the Romans, that when, for instance, a group of senators goes and lynches Tiberius Gracchus and his followers, when they suppress Gaius Gracchus, Saturninus, successive others, Catiline even, that the Romans rush, or at least there are a section of the Roman aristocracy, the Roman elite, that rushes rather too quickly into emergency measures and we must kill our opponents before they kill us. Because you can't always be sure that they were out there to try and kill you, or that what they were going to do was so terrible. Did Tiberius Gracchus really want monarchy? It seems extremely unlikely, but he probably expected that he would have a distinguished career, and he also believed in his legislation, his reforms. But he was from a big family, he had already considerable achievements, and he would have become more famous, more important, added his auctoritas through this. So it's all about this balance thing. I think the roots of this civil war go back to the childhood of Caesar, Cato and others. These were people who grew up with Sulla's civil war, with city of Rome being stormed and violently occupied on 3 occasions within the course of a few years, with proscription lists, with executions, with severed heads being nailed up in the Forum, all of this sort of thing. It's very hard for people like that not to assume that their enemy will do the worst. So personally, I think the best thing for the Republic would have been to have let Caesar return to public life, because bear in mind, yes, he's got lots of money. Yes, he's got lots of influence, status, connections. He's got at the time an army that's loyal to him, but that army would, once he'd got the consulship, most of it would have been disbanded. Maybe he would have raised another one if he'd gone off to another province. But you do have Pompey there. And there is a related question that I might as well bring into this, and I'll do a 2-for-1 deal. What would have happened if Crassus was still alive at the time of the Civil War? But I don't think the Civil War need have happened then. With Crassus, Pompey and Caesar, you have 3 big men, and the fear will always be that if one takes a stand and, chants his arm, aims for revolution, the other 2 will gang up against him, and he can't fight 2. So I think it probably wouldn't have happened. One of the biggest elements within this is Pompey, in a sense, is adrift. He doesn't have Crassus as a rival, as a potential enemy, as an ally that you don't fully trust anymore. Crassus has gone. So the only other person you really respect, you've had to treat as something like an equal, has gone. Your connection with Julius Caesar is weaker because Julia has died. And it's Pompey's drift. It's almost Pompey's desire to assert himself as the senior man in Rome, the big name, the big hero. Caesar as, okay, he's quite good, but he's not on the same level with me. That's what he seems to be trying to do. He wants Caesar to come back and trust to Pompey's good faith to protect him from his enemies, protect him from trial. But by doing so, Caesar would admit, well, okay, I'm not Pompey's equal. I need his help. He is still the big man. I am important, but less important than he is. And the problem is Pompey's record in standing up for people isn't that great, and his political skills are not always as great as all that. Cicero talks about how difficult it is to know what Pompey's thinking and what he's going to do. So I would say more than Cato. Cato on his own couldn't have made the Civil War happen. The Civil War is possible because Pompey drifts ever closer towards Caesar's opponents, and if perhaps the 2 men had actually met up, they probably could have chatted it through and sorted it out. But if Caesar had come back and been consul again, Pompey is still around. Pompey still has this big command. Now, you could argue maybe that would just mean that these 2 had to fight. There would be an even bigger, more organised civil war a year or 2 later. On the other hand, perhaps the state could cope with this. In the end, a system like the Roman Republic needs to take the men like Pompey, like Caesar, like Crassus, and indeed the Catos of this world, and use them for the good of the state in important official roles, and make use of this talent, because these are all very able individuals and very strong personalities. You don't want them to be fighting each other. You want them, yes, to compete, to make each one better and to try to be more distinguished. But the big problem is you don't want them to turn against each other. And the root of it is probably Crassus has gone, leaving Pompey adrift. Pompey, who doesn't really want to take Caesar seriously, who is the youthful hero who's not young anymore, who's liked the praise, liked to be talked of as the Roman Alexander, who has been the greatest hero of the Republic and has now been overshadowed somewhat by Caesar, who is more flamboyant, more charismatic, and a far more shrewd political operator. Caesar in Rome is a lot more capable than Pompey in Rome in terms of getting things done, winning people over. So I think it's not perhaps, is it Cato or Caesar responsible? To some extent it's Pompey, and it always comes back time and time again to the sort of the glib comment from Lucan in his Pharsalia, writing under Nero, so he knows not just what's happened in the civil war, but what's happened in the aftermath, that Pompey could not accept an equal nor Caesar a superior. Cato on his own has no troops. Cato cannot fight a civil war on his own, and opponents in the Senate who don't like Caesar, and they are a minority within the Senate that don't like Caesar, they can't fight, they don't have the military strength to oppose Caesar. They can't risk a war on their own because they're going to lose it. Pompey as a man who has all this reputation, all this influence, all these clients, all these connections, and an army in being, one in Spain, but also there are the 2 legions that have been brought back from Gaul that are supposedly to go out to face the Parthians or protect Syria in that area, but actually have been hanging around in Italy. He's the person who's most likely to be able to take command of them because he has proconsular imperium. He has a legal authority to command troops, specifically in his provinces, but this can easily be expanded by the Senate to include others as well. This is the great danger of Cicero when he arrives back in the months before the Civil War from Cilicia, and he's still got proconsular imperium. So, he's a very likely candidate, not perhaps in terms of his inclinations or abilities, but he has got the legal power there to command troops. He is really a tempting prospect for anybody who's fighting a civil war. So it's probably Pompey more than the others. Cato just hates Caesar and is so determined to destroy him that he doesn't really seem to care what will happen, and is naive in thinking that, we can just win the civil war, Caesar will back down or Caesar will be crushed. Pompey is almost as naive, but nevertheless, he probably just thinks Caesar will back down, that once Gnaeus Pompey, with all his troops, is willing to oppose him, that Caesar will come to heel, behave like a good little boy, and then Pompey will be nice and Pompey will protect him. But, marrying the daughter of one of Caesar's bitterest opponents doesn't help. But again, remember, when you have these votes in the Senate, the vast majority would like everybody to disarm and they just don't want a civil war. So it's one of this clash of personalities, it's individual hatred, individual pride, there's stubbornness on both sides, but really and truly, you do feel this civil war didn't need to happen, and that most of the imaginable consequences of letting Caesar come back and have a second consulship are actually far less serious for the Republic and the Republican system than what does in fact happen. But then, this is human history. People don't often get what they expect.